on this call. We've got Mr. Nolan Bushnell, and I just want to a brief intro of who Nolan is. He's part of one of the many 250 plus global leaders faculty on the Ducere Global Leaders Faculty Video Library. He's a master with a great background of a number of different things. As we're seeing on our screen here is Steve Jobs and Nolan from way back in the day. Also an amazing couple of screenshots of Pong that started years ago that Nolan started with Atari, going back to Chuck-E-Cheese, an amazing entrepreneurial start there. I've got Nolan teaching at a TED conference, doing a TED talk on the end of teaching as we know it. And you talked about student debt being 1.3 trillion, and it's already now 1.7 trillion. Let's just start off about what's new. It looks like you are in your Doc and Marty McFly, creative workshop. I'm assuming that's from home there, but I'd love to hear what is the latest and greatest of what you're doing. Then we'll get into a little Q&A and wrap it with some student Q&A.
Well, I like to do several things, and I'm working on another educational startup, pretty much about individualized unit learning. I've developed some technology a few years ago called adaptive practice, which was very powerful for learning things in the first, I'd say, four or five levels of Bloom's taxonomy. Learn about things, characteristics, what have you. Basically memorization. What I'm working on now is a game-based system where you have to solve problems so that it pushes you up another couple of notches on Bloom's taxonomy, where you're doing some synthesis and some exploration and testing hypotheses and things like that, which I think is a very important skill set that people need. I talk a lot about the gig economy, where it's working for the man right now is probably a path, but increasingly that path is going to be given, you're going to be able to find it because of what you've done, some gig that you've done. And I talk about this as the post-credential era, where passports are going to go away. Driver's licenses are going to go away. All of those items, documents can be forged. And very often they don't really mean what they purport to mean. That is, if I can tell you right now that I can hire a PhD programmer from China and who will not perform as well as a high school dropout in Silicon Valley, and I'm not being pejorative to China, but I'm just saying that there is that people who learn based on passion are so much more capable than people that go through the steps because they think they should. It's just a whole different ballgame. And so gigs become much more important. What did you do last summer? Did you surf and party and drink beer, or did you build something? Did you go to a robotics conference? Did you, and I've often felt that it would be interesting to have a quarter of college in which you did nothing but live in Las Vegas and go to every trade show. You would learn so much about the world of business. And because a trade show is kind of like a dressed up version of a syllabus. So I'm working on that. I'm also very I get fascinated by various things. And right now there is a new gig that's coming up that I find fascinating. It is what I'd call a experiential museum. And you can think of it as the Museum of Ice Cream or the Museum of Candyland or just a, we were just in the wine country in Paso Robles up in middle California. And they had an art installation. And they were packing 500 to 600 people in a night at $40 a head. You know, all of a sudden, it's $1 million enterprise by putting a bunch of lights in a vineyard. And so I think that's kind of an interesting world. I'm working on a game-based campsite where I've taken a whole bunch of what I'd call traditional and non-traditional games and put them out of doors so that instead of an escape room experience, you have an escape trail. So now you're out in the woods but you have to solve problems sort of like an escape room. Various things like that I think I can really enhance what a camping
it's like geocaching meets escape room.
Precisely. Yeah.
That's very cool. How do you personally manage all of these cool ideas and sort of like when something happens, you pick it and select and go for it? I mean, how do you prioritize and pick in your head? Sometimes when these things come up, what you activate on? Do you take the time to make lists? And
I do make lists, but I when I get an idea, I create for me what is a mini business plan. And I start out with a deck because I feel like a PowerPoint deck or a Google Slides deck is very good at putting down just sound bites. I also, if there is some graphics that are available, I'll go into the web and try to research the idea a little bit and find things that are similar or could be representative. And then I do a spreadsheet and I try to figure out what's the likely cost of doing it and what's the likely revenue and how is there headroom? Can this grow? Does it have a natural limitation of X? And then I put it on the shelf. I call it my marination pile. And if you only have one idea, the only time is now. Whereas if you have a multiple idea, what you really want is the right time and the right place. And I did an analysis. People know a lot about my successes, but they don't know a lot about my failures. And I've had some whoppers. and when I analyze the successes versus the failures, the successes were right time and right place with the right team. And the failures, I was forcing it a little bit. It was a little bit ahead of its time. It's a little bit, the technology was a little crude or a little expensive. And so with a little bit more patience, if I'd waited a couple of years, for example, I did a restaurant chain called Ewing with touchscreen ordering and all that. My touchscreen ordering tables cost me $10,000 at the time per table. If I'd waited 2 years, an iPad or an Android tablet for $150 did the same function. So it was very, very, so it was a failure of time and space. So the marination pile is really, really good because a person will come along and I say, boy, that guy would be a great CEO for this project or a technology or something. And so the marinade pile, I think, is a good habit. Get a bunch of ideas and then you can pick the best one.
That's awesome. You're an on the record guy citing life experience. And we've got a lot of people on this call or that are in their MBAs or their bachelor's degrees or considering one. But I love your stories about college, and I love what you're still saying about higher education. That's a lot about relevance. I think one of the really cool stories is I think you said you snuck into computer lab to go focus on what you wanted to do in Utah, right?
Yeah.
Like stuff that is, beyond cool. And I probably don't endorse people to do it because maybe they can't with key cards and security nowadays. But I think, and I've seen bits and pieces about this, like you're teaching your kids maybe in that lab or someplace else earlier, just like how to take stuff apart and fix it. And there seems to be less of that nowadays. I think you told a story of rigging your ceiling with fluorescent bulbs and doing like a light show tied to an electric storm outside.
Right.
That's like nobody does that anymore.
Well,
But
I don't know that I actually have kids that do. Um, we were always a project-based family.
yeah,
They always knew that if they wanted to spend time with dad, let's work on a project together. And I had a little metal shop, a little wood shop, and then of course my lab. And so electronics and transistors and LEDs and all that stuff, that was always part of what we would do. But I also had a lot of building toys. Um, and I felt that, do you know what the best building toy there is? It's a hot glue gun, because you can take anything and stick it to anything. And so the building things is actually, I think, a very good way of keeping your brain sharp, because there's this idea of the artist's struggle that you get an idea in your head and then you try to put it on paper or on canvas, and it's usually not quite what you want it to be, but sometimes it's better than what you want it to be. And you're always kind of looking in any of your projects that when the projects start to take hold of the process, sometimes things are very surprising and things turn out much better than they were anticipated to be.
Hmm. Speaking of mentoring people, Steve Jobs, you were his first boss. I'd love to hear, like, what would Steve say about you as a boss, if he could nowadays? What can you share, with the audience about working with him, or what he might say about what it was like working with you?
I think he liked the fact that I was always challenging and pushing everybody. I think that he would be critical, and was often, that I'm kind of a oh hell, that's good enough, let's ship it. Whereas he was a perfectionist. He, I was more focused on getting the stuff out the door than he was, and so he would think I was a little bit slipshod.
It's all about having the right team balance together, right?
Yeah.
Um,
But the thing I liked about Steve is he had one speed, always on. I mean, he was the only employee I ever had I'd find sleeping under his desk on a Monday morning when I'd come in at 7 o'clock. That's and it wasn't because there was an external deadline that he was trying to meet. It was his own deadline.
hmm, that had to be amazing. You wrote a book it's called Finding the Next Steve Jobs, that is a lot about that culture, some of what you learned, but also around teamwork and about atmosphere, like things you did at Atari, like, the way to have meetings. And at the time, there were a lot of companies that, weren't putting skateboards and beanbags in the office. And now people are coming back to the office. Who is it right now? Is it Zuckerberg? Is it Branson? Is it Jeff Bezos? Who do you feel like is our current or next Steve Jobs?
I kind of think the next Steve Jobs is probably in a garage somewhere.
Mm.
You know, I feel like the new world, looking at people who have been successful in the old world, I don't think is important for the new world. The pandemic I look at as a singularity. And one of the characteristics in mathematics of a singularity is that singularities wipe out trends. That is, when you move past the singularity, talking about topology here, when you move past the singularity, all of a sudden the data that you knew before is wiped out. It's like they say, you know, once you go through a black hole, there's nothing on the other side. But without getting too astronomically crazy, I feel like there are a couple of trends that are quite predictable. One is that physical goods will continue to drop in price, anything that requires labor. And what we're seeing is that the labor input of items becomes the determining factor of cost. And as more and more jobs are robotized, things just get cheaper. And so a lot of things are going to be driven primarily by commodities. You know, how easy, how scarce is steel? How scarce is copper? How scarce is, you know, there's a lot of talk about lithium as being a very, very scarce commodity that will drive the future, because it's number 3 on the periodic table. So therefore, if you want a lightweight battery, it's as low as you can go, you know. And so lithium and lithium salts are going to be really scarce. So I guess coming out of the pandemic and looking at the work of the future, for me, I have been more productive because I think travel is in fact frictional. It adds a lot of friction to a day that is not necessary if you can communicate on Zoom or on Cisco places. So I believe that we are going to consistently and continually devolve from as much travel as we used to do. I think it's going to be a lot less. My companies right now are all virtual, and there's another advantage there. For example, I'm getting software written in Romania, and I can get a very talented set of programmers in Romania for a third the cost of what it would cost me in California. Mm-hmm. And in some cases, 10%, with better outcomes. And so the tech monopoly that the U.S. had is going away as well. I mean, I just think that we're going to be finding that sort of thing. And then when you talk about the Zuckerbergs and the Twitter and what have you, it's going to be they're going to be alternatives. And you can say, well, if the tech is an alternative, but the nobody's there, is that the same? Well, all I know is that MySpace, there were 2 precursors to Facebook,
Right.
Right now, I've got a whole bunch of things that are more important. TikTok came from nowhere. I can remember people thinking that Microsoft was you know, was not dethronable. IBM was, going to have to be broken up by the
Yeah.
antitrust. Life changes, and I think that it will continue to change. And there's no guaranteed winners.
Hmm. It must be, you have to look at some of this and chuckle, right? For a guy who's seen these cycles come through, right? When people say, oh, that's never going to work. These guys are too big. And you and, Jobs and Wozniak, we're in a garage feeling like, oh yeah, watch this.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
and you
Yeah,
did it. I think that prior 5 minutes and what you're saying now is your go back and watch this moment of the video. So it's interesting to hear about, oh, well, we're always going to use Facebook. We're always going to use Twitter. And they dominate. And well, really, maybe there's other ways to chat and network and get stuff done. What, with so many MBA people in life change right now, like a lot of people go get their MBA to think about what they want to do next, um, either in their current job or start their own project in their garage on a Zoom screen, networking across the globe. What would you say is, what's your advice for them? What are the trends, the best practices, the industries to keep an eye on, to look out for?
I think that there are two or three things that an MBA gives you that's really valuable. And one of them is business law. You really have to understand frameworks. You need to understand a little bit about how valuable patents are and trademarks. Like, I think patents are pretty worthless in general. I think trademarks and copyrights are very valuable. But more than that, the world of accounting, I'm surprised how many people who are really smart and capable people really can't put together a financial plan, can't put together a simple income statement and follow it up with a balance sheet and cash flow. If you're an MBA and you can't do that, like with a left-handed dribble, you're really missing the boat, because what the CEO of a company is the profit architect. And you have to understand when you're maximizing profit or assets or cash flow, because these are sometimes different. In the early days of Atari, my whole job was maximizing cash flow. I would give away profit all the time to get better cash flow. And I've talked to people now, and they said, what? You gave away profit to get cash flow? I said, yeah, I would pay more for a part if they gave me 90-day terms than if they required me to pay in 30 days. And they scratched their head and said, well, why would you do that? And I said, I had no money. This was before venture capital was big. We started the company with $250. I had to operate the company in positive cash flow. And the idea was I'd build the product and sell it in a week and not have to pay for the parts for 2 months, 3 months. That was positive cash flow. That allowed me to grow.
It seems like there's a lot of, when you read about entrepreneurs, they talk about getting through their stages, getting through their seed rounds, getting through their investments, and then flipping it for acquisition. Back in the Atari days, was that the plan, or did that, did the sale, just happen?
Well, believe it or not, in the early 70s, venture capital had just been invented. In fact, when I started Atari, I hadn't heard of venture capital. And I was in Silicon Valley, so that can tell you where it was. you basically got, your funding was friends and family, whatever
Yeah.
you could do in your back pocket. And so it was very, very different then. We didn't raise a penny of venture capital until we were at 30 million in sales. And we got from 0 to 30 million sales on that $250. Actually, it was 500. My partner put in 252. So the total capitalization of the company was $500.
Looking at the brands, I mean, do you pass by a ChuckECheese and say, "Oh, I just got to go in and see what"? I'd love to know if like you put on a baseball cap and sunglasses and just walk in and or
no, but I do like to take grandkids there.
Yeah.
That's fun because the big problem once you are no longer running something, you feel like your children have been abused. Like I go in to ChuckECheese and I see 20 things that I think they are really messing up on, and it bugs the hell out of me.
Note to any manager: just if you see Nolan, just ask anything, any recommendations, right?
Yeah, I mean, there is always a vision that you have with a company of what you want to provide to your customer in a seamless and efficient way.
Mm.
And when that vision is perverted somehow, it offends me. And so enough said.
Yeah. Question from Josh: has the availability of VC funds, has that stifled the raw instincts in today's entrepreneurs from making products that could have immediate cash flow?
I don't know. I think that there's an awful lot of Me Tooism in venture capital, but there's still some outliers that get funded that wouldn't have gotten funded otherwise, that lead to some really cool innovations. So I think that more money going into ideas is better than less. And I might add, the United States is an innovation engine for the world. And this innovation is tested here, fixed here. And, there are companies now in Europe that their whole business plan is to copy an innovation and then at some point in time sell it back to the regular company when they decide they want to expand into Europe. And they're doing it remarkably and often. It's the damnedest idea. I mean, it's a smart idea, but because like I say, patents are worthless now. Mm-hmm. And if you there was a guy that just did that with eBay a couple of years ago. And when eBay wanted to really expand into Europe or into London, they bought his company for over $1 billion.
Michael Pettijohn asked, in general, how do you see the evolution of education?
I think there are two things that are very pivotal, and that is no grades and no grades. And the first no grades is if you're in the 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, that implies batch processing. That's wrong. It's bad. It's counterproductive. You shouldn't batch kids because there's too much variation in what's going on. No grades, no A, B, C, D. People should learn 100% before they move on. Because, for example, in math, if you have C's in your previous math classes, at some point, because of the imprecision of your knowledge, the wheels come off and you can't deal with algebra or calculus because you'd never really understood fractions, you know, that kind of thing. The other part is that once you have individualized education, it allows the student to deep dive on their interests. And that is shown to be very, very successful in Finland, where they really allow a lot of latitude of direction and focus on your passions. The other part is that what is the difference if you have no grades, third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade? What's the difference between junior high school and high school? No difference. We erase those boundaries. Then you ask the further question, what's the difference between high school and college? And once those are erased as well, the question comes is there's the educational complex that can be totally delivered by online for free or for a modest subscription. And how far can it go? Can you learn, you know, auto body repair? Can you learn plumbing? Can, you know, and who's to say that you shouldn't be able to be a good plumber or a good electrician while you're learning to be a creating the next level of Twitter, you know, or what have you.
Yeah.
I think the gig economy is another way to say that you want to have a whole bunch of skills. You want to have a tool belt of capabilities. And the broader that tool belt is, the more likely you are to have some kind of a success.
Mm.
For example, how many jobs have you had? You know, have you ever flipped burgers? Have you ever, you know, been a handy person? Have you walked dogs? You know, each of these gigs are instructive on some level. And somewhere along the line, you will want to look at something and say, I think that can be done better by application of things that I have, these skills that I have. And that's how a unicorn is born.
Networking like Nolan. You seem to have this masterful ability, you know, to kind of pivot to the next industry and, you know, maybe grab something off that marination shelf and connect the dots and connect the people. And you know, back in the day, you couldn't message somebody on LinkedIn across the globe the way you can now. What's your secret formula? You know, what would you suggest for people for networking from a global basis to win, you know, the way you do? Any tips or advice around that?
The biggest mistake people make is they are scared to talk about their idea for fear it'll be stolen. And what that does, it almost guarantees that you're going to be a failure. Because what you want to talk to everybody about your idea. You want to get feedback. You want to get, you know, some ideas. You want to find out whether that has been tried before and failed. And if it failed, why? I can remember taking a toy design into the buyer at Toys R Us. And he said, oh, yeah, that old saw. And I thought it was really cool. He says, no, I see that every 3 years. He says, it fails because of this, this, and this. And the minute he said it, I knew. I said, oh, yeah, I can see why that failed. You know, I would have spent money on tooling and building things if I hadn't have just showed him a prototype drawing. You know, cost me nothing, saved me a bunch. So that's the one thing. Talk. in every city, there are groups of hacker conferences, prototype conferences, universities where there are groups of people that get together and talk about entrepreneurship. I still think a would-be entrepreneur needs to go to Las Vegas and spend a month and go to all the trade shows. I think that's probably the coolest thing you can do. And incidentally, before you go into Photoshop and you create a whole bunch of press business cards, because with the press you can always get into the place free. You don't want to have to pay to go.
That's great advice. If anything, right there, save some money on some convention fees and whatnot.
Yeah.
I've got a picture of computer space, and I think we'll wrap up with this amazing story. I think you built this on a clay model and took somebody who built pools did this, but I don't know if you can see it right now. If not, I'll put it in the description as well. But computer space, designed in 1970s. It looks like it would be coming out today in terms of modern shape and form. But talk about entrepreneurial. Like, you wouldn't think this guy went and talked to somebody who made pools and said, make this for me, right? But can you tell us just a bit more about that?
Well, I wanted it to be a space thing. And incidentally, here's the clay model.
Oh my gosh. Wow. That is amazing. There it is. Wow.
I think that what you want to do is, there's actually such a thing as too much innovation. But when you're young and dumb, you don't know about it. I mean, I did that when I was 28 years old, and the video game was so new, but I knew it was going to be successful. And so I wanted it to be housed in something that was really cool. And if you look at the Pong cabinet after that, it's a real step down.
Which, I mean, for people who don't, literally pretty much the first and only video game inspired from you working in arcades. And right, you said, let's put a TV in to a box, and you think people will play with it, which then became the inspiration for, as you said, the wrong side of the equation. And you started ChuckECheese after you had the video game business going.
Exactly. Right? Yep.
So get on the right side of the equation.
Every time.
Nolan, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the great questions. Any parting shots?
Just look up LearnUp, and I've got 2 books coming out this fall. One is called Video Games 2071, and it's a 100-year anniversary of the video game, and it's my science fiction book, sort of a look into the future, and it should be out sometime in, I'm aiming for December 1st. I don't know if I'll make it or not. And the other one is LearnUp School of the Future, which is sort of the manifesto of what I think the School of the Future is going to look like. So you could look at them as both science fiction, but one is more prescriptive in a non-fiction way, and the other one is totally fiction. So I think you'll have some fun with them.
Definitely fun. Again, we're truly honored. Thank you so much for your time. There's more Nolan videos, of course, on YouTube, on Ducere Global Business School, some from a few years ago when we chatted. But have an amazing week. Stay safe, stay happy and healthy. Good luck with the books, and we look forward to reading those and chatting again sometime.
Thanks a lot, guys. Let's have fun.
Cheers.